In 1927, a massive federal raid put a large quantity of Innsmouth residents into federal internment camps. Part of the town and surrounding reef were supposedly blown up. There had been stories of strange people in Innsmouth for years, but the tale of one poor visitor pushed it over the edge, and a secret investigation revealed the true terrors of the town. A young man touring New England as a rite of passage was travelling to Arkham, but the cheapest route involved a bus through Innsmouth, and despite warnings, he decided to go. The bus broke down and he had to stay overnight, finding only horror and terror, causing him to flee down a disused railway track. But worse was to come when he discovered his true lineage. All in The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. Link to part 1 above. To help us grow, please like, subscribe, and be sure to click the bell. But just as importantly, comment and share. The algorithm must be fed, and comments are one of its favourite meals. You might want to help guide our explorations of the strange, dark and terrible by joining the Eldritch Order on Discord. You can via our Patreon or YouTube, coming soon. We release 3 episodes a week, 2 live streams that chat guides the story on, and complete versions when a story concludes. In part 2, we start to discover the disturbing town of Innsmouth and learn of Zadok Allen, one of the stranger locals who is willing to talk about the town. What do you think we will find? What is the secret of Innsmouth? Let me know in the comments. But for now, it's time to enter the Cave of Chronicles. Shortly before 10 the next morning, I stood with my one small valise in front of Hammond's drugstore in Old Market Square, waiting for the Innsmouth bus. In a few moments, a small motor coach of extreme decrepitude and dirty grey colour rattled down State Street, made a turn and drew up at the curb beside me. I felt immediately that it was the right one. A guess which the half-illegible sign on the windshield, Arkham, Innsmouth, Newport, soon verified. There were only 3 passengers, dark, unkempt men of sullen visage and somewhat youthful cast, and when the vehicle stopped, they clumsily shambled about and began walking up State Street in a silent, almost furtive fashion. The driver also alighted. This, I reflected, must be Joe Sargent, mentioned by the ticket agent, and even before I had noticed any details, there spread over me a wave of spontaneous aversion which could be neither checked nor explained. He was a thin, stoop-shouldered man, not much under 6 feet tall, dressed in shabby blue civilian clothes and wearing a frayed grey golf cap. His age was perhaps 35, but the odd deep creases in the sides of his neck made him seem older when one did not study his dull, expressionless face. He had a narrow head, bulging, watery eyes that seemed never to wink, a flat nose, a receding forehead and chin, and singularly underdeveloped ears. As he walked toward the bus, I observed his peculiarly shambling gait and saw that his feet were inordinately immense. The more I studied them, the more I wondered how he could buy any shoes to fit them. A certain greasiness about the fellow increased my dislike. He was evidently given to working or lounging around the fish docks, and carried with him much of their characteristic smell. Just what foreign blood was in him, I could not even guess. I was sorry when I saw there would be no other passengers on the bus. Somehow, I did not like the idea of riding alone with this driver. But as the leaving time obviously approached, I conquered my qualms and followed the man aboard, extending him a dollar bill and murmuring the single word, Innsmouth. At length, the decrepit vehicle started with a jerk and rattled noisily past the old brick buildings of State Street, amid a cloud of vapour from the exhaust. The day was warm and sunny, but the landscape of sand, sedge-grass and stunted shrubbery became more and more desolate as we proceeded. Out of the window I could see the blue water and sandy line of Plum Island, and we presently drew very near the beach as our narrow road veered off from the main highway to Rowley and Ipswich. At last we lost sight of Plum Island and saw the vast expanse of the open Atlantic on our left. Our narrow course began to climb steeply, and I felt a singular sense of disquiet in looking at the lonely crest ahead, where the rutted roadway met the sky. It was as if the bus were about to keep on its ascent, leaving the sane earth altogether and merging with the unknown arcana of the upper air and cryptical sky. The smell of the sea took on ominous implications, and the silent driver's bent, rigid back and narrow head became more and more hateful. As I looked at him, I saw the back of his head was almost as hairless as his face, having only a few straggling yellow strands upon a grey, scabrous surface. Then we reached the crest and beheld the outspread valley beyond, where the Manuxet joins the sea, just north of the long line of cliffs that culminate in Kingsport Head. All my attention was captured by the nearer panorama just below me. I realised, come face to face with the rumour-shadowed Innsmouth. It was a town of wide extent and dense construction, yet one with a portentous dearth of visible life. The vast huddle of sagging gambrel roofs and peaked gables conveyed with offensive clearness the idea of wormy decay as we approached along the now descending road. I could see that many roofs had wholly caved in. Stretching inland, I saw the rusted grass-grown line of the abandoned railway, with leaning telegraph poles now devoid of wires. Here and there, the ruins of wharves jutted out from the shore to end in indeterminate rottenness, the furthest south seeming the most decayed. And far out at sea, despite a high tide, I glimpsed a long black line, scarcely rising above the water, yet carrying a suggestion of odd latent malignancy. This, I knew, must be Devil's Reef. As I looked, a subtle, curious sense of beckoning seemed superadded to the grim repulsion. And oddly enough, I found this overtone more disturbing than the primary impression. As the bus reached a lower level, I began to catch the steady note of a waterfall through the unnatural stillness. The leaning, unpainted houses grew thicker, lined both sides of the road, and displayed more urban tendencies than did those we were leaving behind. The panorama ahead had contracted to a street scene, and in spots I could see where a cobblestone pavement and stretches of brick sidewalks had formerly existed. All the houses were apparently deserted, and there were occasional gaps where tumble-down chimneys and cellar walls told of buildings that had collapsed. Pervading everything was the most nauseous, fishy odour imaginable, and I was not to reach my destination without one other very strong impression of poignantly disagreeable quality. The bus had come to a sort of open concourse or radial point, with churches on two sides and the bedraggled remains of a circular green in the centre, and I was looking at a large pillared hall on the right-hand junction ahead. The structure's once white paint was now grey and peeling, and the black and gold sign on the pediment was so faded I could only with difficulty make out the words Esoteric Order of Dagon. The door of the church basement was open, revealing a rectangle of blackness inside. As I looked, a certain object crossed or seemed to cross that dark rectangle, burning into my brain a momentary conception of nightmare, which was all the more maddening because analysis could not show a single nightmarish quality about it. It was a living object, the first except the driver that I had seen since entering the compact part of the town, and had I been in a steadier mood, I would have found nothing whatever of terror in it. Clearly, as I realised a moment later, it was the pastor, clad in some peculiar vestments, doubtless introduced since the Order of Dagon had modified the ritual of the local churches. The thing which had probably caught my first subconscious glance hadn't supplied the touch of bizarre horror was the tall tiara he wore, an almost exact duplicate of the one Miss Tilton had shown me the previous evening. This, acting on my imagination, had supplied namelessly sinister qualities to the indeterminate face and robed shambling form beneath it. A very thin sprinkling of repellent-looking youngish people now became visible on the sidewalks, lone individuals and silent knots of 2 or 3. The lower floors of the crumbling houses sometimes harboured small shops with dingy signs, and I noticed a parked truck or two as we rattled along. The sound of waterfalls became more and more distinct, and I presently saw a fairly large, deep river gorge ahead, spanned by a wide iron-railed highway bridge, beyond which a large square opened out. Then we rolled into the large semicircular square across the river and drew up upon the right-hand side in front of a tall cupola-crowned building with remnants of yellow paint and a half-effaced sign proclaiming it to be the Gilman House. I was glad to get out of the bus and at once proceeded to check my valise in the shabby hotel lobby. There was only one person in sight, an elderly man without what I had come to call the Innsmouth look. I decided not to ask him any of the questions which bothered me, remembering that odd things had been noticed in this hotel. Instead, I strolled out on the square from which the bus had already gone and studied the scene minutely and appraisingly. For some reason or other, I chose to make my first inquiries at the chain grocery, whose personnel was not likely to be native to Innsmouth. I found a solitary boy of about 17 in charge, and was pleased to note the brightness and affability which promised cheerful information. He seemed exceptionally eager to talk, and I soon gathered that he did not like the place, its fishy smell, or its furtive people. His family did not like him to work in Innsmouth, but the chain had transferred him there, and he did not wish to give up his job. There was, he said, no public library or chamber of commerce in Innsmouth, but I could probably find my way about. The street I had come down was Federal. West of that were the fine old residence streets, Broad, Washington, Lafayette and Adams, and east of it were the Shorewood slums. Certain spots were almost forbidden territory, as he had learned at considerable cost. One must not, for example, linger much around the Marsh Refinery, or around any of the still used churches, or around the pillared Order of Dagon Hall at New Church Green. Those churches were very odd, all violently still used churches, all around the pillared Order of Dagon Hall at New Church Green. Those churches were very odd, all violently disavowed by their respective denominations elsewhere, and apparently using the queerest kind of ceremonials and clerical vestments. As for the Innsmouth people, the youth hardly knew what to make of them. Their appearance, especially those staring, unwinking eyes, which one never saw shut, was certainly shocking enough, and their voices were disgusting. It was awful to hear them chanting in their churches at night, especially during their main festivals or revivals, which fell twice a year on April 30th and October 31st. They were very fond of water and swam a great deal in both river and harbour. Swimming races out to Devil Reef were very common, and everyone in sight seemed well able to share in this arduous sport. It would be of no use, my informant said, to ask the natives anything about the place. The only one who would talk was a very aged but normal-looking man who lived at the poorhouse on the north rim of the town and spent his time walking around or lounging around the fire station. This hoary character, Zadok Allen, was 96 years old and somewhat touched in the head, besides being the town drunkard. He was a strange, furtive creature who constantly looked over his shoulder as if afraid of something, and when sober could not be persuaded to talk at all with strangers. He was, however, unable to resist any offer of his favourite poison, and once drunk would furnish the most astonishing fragments of whispered reminiscence. After all, though little useful data could be gained from him, since his stories were all insane, incomplete hints of impossible marvels and horrors which could have no source save in his own distorted fancy. Nobody ever believed him, but the natives did not like him to drink and talk with any strangers. And it was not always safe to be seen questioning him. It was probably from him that some of the wildest popular whispers and delusions were derived. The Marshes, together with the other three gently bred families of the town, the Waits, the Gilmans and the Elliots, were all very retiring. They lived in immense houses along Washington Street, and several were reputed to harbour in concealment certain kinsfolk whose personal aspect forbade public view, and whose deaths had been reported and recorded. Warning me that most of the street signs were down, the youth drew for my benefit a rough but ample and painstaking sketch map of the town's salient features. After a moment's study, I felt sure it would be of great help and pocketed it with profuse thanks. Thus began my systematic, though half bewildered tour of Innsmouth's narrow, shadow-blighted ways. Crossing the bridge and turning towards the roar of the lower falls, I passed close to the March refinery, which seemed oddly free from the noise of industry. This building stood on the steep river bluff near a bridge and an open confluence of streets, which I took to be the earliest civic centre, displaced after the Revolution by the present town square. Recrossing the gorge on the Main Street Bridge, I struck a reason of utter desertation, which somehow made me shudder. Collapsing huddles of gambrel roofs formed a jagged and fantastic skyline, above which rose the ghoulish, decapitated steeple of an ancient church. Wych Street was as deserted as Main, though it differed in having many brick and stone warehouses still in excellent shape. Walker Street was almost its duplicate, save there were great seaward gaps where wharves had been. Not a living thing did I see, except for the scattered fishermen on the distant breakwater, and not a sound did I hear, save the lapping of the harbour tides and the roar of the falls in the Monuxet. I kept north along the Main to Martin, then turning inland, crossing Federal Street safely north of the Green and entering the decayed patrician neighbourhood of Northern Broad, Washington, Lafayette and Adams Streets. Following Washington Street towards the river, I now faced a zone of former industry and commerce, noting the ruins of a factory ahead and seeing others with the traces of an old railway station and covered railway bridge beyond up the gorge on my right. The uncertain bridge now before me was posted with a warning sign, but I took the risk and crossed again to the south bank, where traces of life reappeared. Furtive, shambling creatures stared cryptically in my direction, and more normal faces eyed me coldly and curiously. Innsmouth was rapidly becoming intolerable, and I turned down Payne Street towards the square in the hope of getting some vehicle to take me to Arkham. before the still distant starting time of that sinister bus. It was then I saw the tumble-down fire station on my left and noticed the red-faced, bushy-bearded, watery-eyed old man in nondescript rags who sat on a bench in front of it, talking with a pair of unkempt but not abnormal-looking firemen. This, of course, must be Zadok Allen, the half-crazed, licorice, non-agenarian, whose tales of old Innsmouth and its shadow were so hideous and incredible. So ends part 2 of The Shadow over Innsmouth. In part 3, we hear the story of Zadok Allen, and the true history starts to emerge. Remember to comment on what you really think is happening. The most deserving comment will be pinned to the top. If you enjoyed the tale, it helps us if you let others know, so please click the like button and share with others that may be interested. Subscribing will let you travel with us on further adventures of the dark and terrible, with the bell notifying you as we set off. If you want to join our Eldritch Order on Discord, come visit us on Patreon or YouTube, coming soon. Then you can join in the discussions and even help guide the choice of stories. There is an ever-growing list of insane benefits. See the description for details of the Patreon and for a link to Canje Studios to find out how modern board games can help you create your own dark and terrible stories. Until next time, farewell. But beware, in the abyssal depths where the sun's reach is but a myth, ancient horrors slumber, their dreams weaving nightmares into the fabric of reality.